She told me to act like a real man. So I did. I walked away without looking back. You know, it's funny how one sentence can stick to your bones, how it can echo in your mind long after the person who said it is gone. Be a man, she screamed that night, like it was an insult. And maybe it was, but I learned something that day. Sometimes being a man means not fighting back, not yelling, not begging someone to stay. Sometimes it means standing up, walking out, and never returning. Before I tell you what happened, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and drop a comment if you've ever had someone tell you that you weren't enough, because this one's for every man who turned pain into peace. It started on an ordinary Thursday evening, the kind that should have been simple. Dinner at home, candles lit, 2 glasses of wine half empty on the table. I remember the smell of rosemary chicken, her favorite. I'd come home early from work just to surprise her, to make the evening special. She didn't notice. She was on her phone, smiling that smile I hadn't seen in a while, the one she used to give me. I said her name once softly. She didn't answer. I said it again. She sighed, finally setting her phone down, her eyes rolling like I was interrupting something important. "What?" she said flatly. I tried to smile, tried to keep the calm in my voice. "I thought we could eat together," I said. "I made your favorite." She looked at the table, then at me, and her lips twitched into something between a smirk and a frown. "You really think this fixes anything?" she asked. My chest tightened, but I stayed quiet. "You can't just keep pretending everything's fine, Daniel. You're boring, predictable. I feel like I'm living with a shadow." I wanted to ask her what she meant, what she wanted from me, but then her phone buzzed again. And before she could stop herself, I saw the name on the screen. A man's name I didn't recognize. My throat went dry. "Who's that?" I asked. She froze for just a second too long, then forced a laugh. "It's just a friend." I didn't believe her, and she knew it. Something in her expression shifted, hardened, as if she was daring me to push further. "You don't trust me," she said, her voice sharper now. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She picked up the phone and held it out. "Go ahead," she said. "Read it. You'll see what a real man looks like." Her voice was cold, venom wrapped in silk. My hands trembled, not from anger, but from the realization that the person I'd built my world around was gone. She'd been gone for a long time. I read enough. The messages were short, but clear. Too clear. Jokes, plans, late-night talks, and words that used to be ours. I set the phone down carefully on the table like it was something fragile. She crossed her arms and looked at me, waiting for me to explode, waiting for me to prove her right. That I wasn't a real man. I just stood there, staring at her. "Why?" I asked finally. It wasn't anger in my voice. It was something else. Quiet disbelief. She sighed, rolling her eyes like I was a child asking a stupid question. "Because he's not afraid to be one," she said. "He knows what he wants. You just exist. You used to try. Now you're comfortable, weak." Something inside me cracked, but not the way she expected. There were no tears, no shouting, just silence. She wanted a fight, wanted to see me crawl, wanted to prove she had power. I gave her none of that. I walked to the bedroom, opened the closet, and started packing a small suitcase. She followed me, still talking, her voice rising, her words blurring into static. "Oh, now you're leaving. That's what a real man does, runs away." I didn't answer. I folded my shirts neatly, zipped the bag, and picked up my wedding ring from the nightstand. I looked at it for a long time before setting it gently on the table beside her half-empty glass of wine. "Where are you going?" she demanded, her voice breaking now. I looked at her one last time, really looked, and saw the woman I used to love, but no longer recognized. "You wanted me to act like a man," I said quietly. "So I am." Then I walked out the door. No shouting, no goodbye, no turning back, just the sound of my own footsteps fading into the night. That night was the first time in years I slept peacefully, not because I was happy, but because I was free. It's strange how silence can be louder than any scream. It's the sound of letting go, the sound of dignity finding its way back home. And in that silence, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let anyone ever make me feel small again. Not by words, not by comparison, not by love twisted into cruelty. I didn't know then what life would look like without her. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't walking away from her. I was walking toward myself. The first few weeks after I left were strange. The silence felt heavy at first, like I had stepped into an empty space where everything familiar had vanished. The mornings were the hardest. I would wake up expecting to hear the sound of her moving around, the faint clinking of dishes, the routine arguments about nothing. But there was nothing now, just the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. I got a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy, just enough to start over. The walls were bare, the furniture secondhand, but for the first time in years, I could breathe. I remember sitting at the window every night, watching the city lights flicker and thinking how strange it was to feel both broken and free at the same time. People say heartbreak makes you stronger, but that's not true. At first, it makes you quieter. It strips everything away until you're forced to face yourself, without distractions, without excuses. That's what happened to me. I threw myself into work. I was a construction manager before, a decent one, but I had always played it safe. I took jobs I didn't care about, avoided risks, followed the path everyone expected. But something changed after that night. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was the need to prove something, not to her anymore, but to myself. I started taking contracts others wouldn't touch. Late deadlines, complicated designs, projects everyone said were doomed to fail. And somehow, I made them work. I stopped thinking about how tired I was or how far I had to go. Every sleepless night, every missed meal felt like a step away from who I had been. There were days I'd catch myself remembering her words. Be a man. You're weak. He's better. They didn't sting the same way anymore. They became fuel. Every insult became a reason to keep going. Every doubt became another brick in the foundation I was building. People at work started noticing. My team followed my lead. The projects got bigger, and before long, I was offered a partnership in a new firm. It was small, but growing, and they needed someone willing to take risks. I didn't hesitate. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to fail. But even as things improved, there were nights when the past came knocking. I'd see couples on the street, laughing, holding hands, and something inside me would ache. Not for her, but for the man I used to be. The one who believed that love meant endurance, that being a man meant staying no matter how much it hurt. I realized now that love without respect is just slow destruction, and she had destroyed enough of me. One evening, I ran into someone who used to know us both, an old friend of hers, Julia. We met by accident at a cafe. She recognized me instantly. "Daniel," she said, surprise flashing across her face. "Wow, you look different, better." We talked for a while, just small talk at first. Then she sighed and said quietly, "You know, she talks about you sometimes." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Yeah," Julia said. "Not often, but when she does, it's always the same. She says you changed after she left, that you became colder, more distant." I smiled a little. "I guess she was right," I said. "She broke something, but I built something better in its place." Julia nodded slowly, then leaned forward. "She's not doing great, Daniel. The guy she left you for, he's gone. She thought she could do better. Turns out he didn't think she was enough either." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. There was a time I would have felt satisfaction hearing that, maybe even joy. But all I felt was a dull sadness, not for her, but for the person she chose to be. "We all make choices," I said finally. "Some of us just learn from them." Julia gave me a look that said she understood. We parted ways after that, but her words lingered in my mind. A few weeks later, something happened that brought everything full circle. I was at a networking event for contractors and developers, the kind of thing I used to hate, but now had to attend. It was in a hotel ballroom, polished and loud, filled with people pretending to enjoy small talk. I was talking to a client when I heard laughter behind me, that same sharp, familiar sound that used to fill my house. I turned, and there she was, Claire, my ex-wife. She looked almost the same, maybe a little older, her confidence slightly cracked, but still there. When our eyes met, her smile froze. For a moment, it was like time folded in on itself. The years disappeared, and we were back in that kitchen, the wine glasses, the words that ended everything. She hesitated, then walked over. "Daniel," she said softly, as if saying my name was something fragile. I nodded. "Claire." We stood there for a few seconds, surrounded by noise but locked in silence. She looked at me carefully, her eyes searching my face for something. Guilt, maybe nostalgia, maybe regret. You look good, she said finally. Successful. I shrugged slightly. I've been working. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. I've heard. People talk. You've built quite a name for yourself. I nodded again, unsure what to say. The truth was, the moment didn't sting the way I thought it would. It didn't even really move me. It just was. She looked down, twisting her ringless finger nervously. I guess you really did learn how to be a man, she said quietly. Her voice trembled just a little, the edge of pride gone. I met her gaze, calm, steady. No, I said. I just learned how to walk away. She didn't reply. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. And in that silence, I felt something shift, not between us, but inside me. Whatever tie had once held me, there was gone, for good. After that night at the event, I didn't think about her much. Seeing Claire again hadn't reopened old wounds. It had confirmed that they'd finally healed, but the truth is, healing doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in slowly, showing itself in small moments when you realize something that used to hurt doesn't anymore. I spent the next few months focused entirely on work. The business had taken off faster than I ever imagined. We were expanding into new cities, hiring more people, landing contracts I used to only dream of. I was traveling often, meeting investors, running on coffee and determination. People began to look at me differently, the same people who once doubted me. It was strange, really, how the same face could look at you with pity one year and admiration the next. But success didn't feel like revenge anymore. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving myself right. I had finally built something that didn't depend on anyone's approval. Yet sometimes, late at night, when the city lights blurred outside my apartment window, I'd catch myself thinking about what it all meant, what being a man really meant. Claire had used those words like a weapon, but maybe that's what pushed me to understand their real meaning. It wasn't about dominance, money, or how loud you could shout. It was about composure, about standing tall when someone tries to break you, about walking away from destruction, even when your heart is still bleeding. I realized that true strength doesn't roar. It's silent, patient, unshakable. That was the kind of man I had become. One morning, I got an unexpected call from a local charity organization. They were hosting an event to support young entrepreneurs and wanted me to be one of the speakers. I almost declined. Public speaking wasn't my thing, but something in me said yes. Maybe it was time to tell a story that wasn't about loss, but about resilience. The event was set in a downtown conference hall, bright and modern, filled with people eager to learn and network. As I stood backstage waiting to go on, I thought about the irony of it all. Just a few years ago, I was barely holding myself together, and now people were calling me an example of strength. When my turn came, I stepped onto the stage, the lights warm on my face. I looked out at the audience, students, small business owners, people with that same flicker of fear and hope I used to feel. I didn't have a prepared speech. I just spoke from the truth. A few years ago, I began. Someone told me to act like a man. At the time, I thought it meant fighting harder, proving myself to them. But I learned something. Being a man isn't about winning arguments or being tough. It's about walking away from what destroys you. It's about finding peace in silence. The room was quiet, every face fixed on me. I could see a few nodding, others leaning forward. Sometimes, I continued, the bravest thing you can do is leave the place that makes you question your worth. When I stepped off the stage, people stood and clapped. It wasn't pride I felt. It was peace. A few days later, as if fate couldn't resist testing that peace, I got a message from Claire. It was short, almost hesitant. Can we talk? I stared at it for a long time, debating whether to respond. Curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet her for coffee. When I walked into the cafe, I barely recognized her. The confident, sharp-tongued woman I'd once known looked smaller now, not physically, but in presence. Her eyes were tired, her smile forced. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. We sat down, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with things unspoken. Finally, she said, "I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry." I didn't say anything. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with a silver bracelet. "I was cruel. I thought I was helping you toughen up, but I was just tearing you down. And you didn't deserve that." Her words hung in the air. A few years ago, they would have meant everything to me. Now they just felt unnecessary, not because they weren't sincere, but because I no longer needed them. "I appreciate that," I said finally, "but you don't owe me anything. We both made choices." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "I see that now. I lost something good because I didn't know what it was worth." There it was, the confession I'd once wanted. But instead of triumph, all I felt was empathy. Not love, not anger, just understanding. We talked for a little while longer, mostly about neutral things, her job, mutual friends, life in general. When it was time to go, she stood up and said, "You really did become the man I always wanted you to be." I looked at her, calm and steady. "No," I said, "I became the man I was supposed to be." As I walked out of the cafe, I didn't look back. The sunlight hit my face, warm and clean. For the first time, I realized I wasn't haunted by her anymore. I wasn't defined by what she'd said or done. I was just me. The quiet, steady rhythm of my footsteps on the sidewalk felt like freedom. Every choice I made after that moment came from a place of peace, not pain. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need validation. I just needed to keep walking forward without turning around. But life has a way of circling back when you least expect it. A few months later, I was invited to another event, this one a private dinner hosted by a group of investors. It was in one of those high-rise buildings with floor-to-ceiling windows and city views that make you forget how small you are. I was one of the keynote guests, sitting among people who once wouldn't have given me a second glance. As I was talking to one of the organizers, I heard a voice behind me say, "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" I turned and froze. It wasn't Claire, but it was someone who would change everything again. It was a woman I hadn't seen before, elegant but grounded, with an energy that immediately stood out from the rest of the polished crowd. She had this calm confidence in her movements, the kind that didn't demand attention but naturally drew it. Her name was Laura. She smiled, asked if she could join me, and something about her tone made it easy to say yes. We started talking, at first about the event, the food, the typical small talk, but there was something effortless about the conversation. She wasn't trying to impress me, and I wasn't performing either. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't measured against expectations or reminded of failures. It was just two people talking, listening, understanding. Over the next few weeks, we kept in touch. Coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into dinners that lasted until midnight. I didn't realize how much I had missed simple connection, the kind where you don't feel like you have to earn your worth every time you open your mouth. Laura had been through her own kind of pain too. She had her scars, her disappointments, but she wore them like they were part of her strength, not her shame. There was something profoundly grounding about that. I remember one night in particular. We were sitting on a bench overlooking the river, the city lights reflecting on the water. She told me how her ex used to tell her she was too ambitious for a woman. I laughed softly at the irony, at how familiar that sounded. "Seems like we both had to walk away to find ourselves," I said. She smiled, looking out at the water. "Maybe walking away isn't about leaving someone behind," she said quietly. "Maybe it's about walking toward who you were always meant to be." That sentence stuck with me because it was true. Every painful step I had taken away from my past had led me closer to the man I was supposed to become. For years, I thought strength was about endurance, about staying, no matter how much it hurt. But real strength was knowing when to stop fighting battles that only left scars. Over time, Laura and I grew closer, not in a whirlwind of passion or drama, but in the steady warmth of mutual respect. She never asked me about Claire, and I never asked her about the man who had broken her trust. We both knew that kind of pain, and neither of us needed to reopen those wounds. Instead, we focused on what was in front of us. There were moments when I'd catch her laughing, head tilted back, eyes bright with joy, and I'd feel this quiet realization that I had finally built something real, not a company, not a reputation, but peace, the kind that no one could take away. One day, months later, I got an invitation to a charity gala. It was a formal event, one of those high-profile gatherings where everyone who was anyone in the business world showed up. Laura and I decided to go together. The evening was elegant. Music, champagne, flashes of cameras, polite smiles hiding competitive eyes. I was standing near the entrance, greeting a few colleagues, when the last person I expected to see walked in. Claire. She looked almost the same, but older in a way that had nothing to do with age. Her confidence was brittle now, her eyes scanning the room like she was searching for something familiar. And then she saw me. Her gaze froze for a moment, and then she noticed Laura beside me. I could see it in her face, the recognition, the realization that life had moved on without her. She approached us, her smile polite but strained. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "It's been a while." I nodded. "It has." Laura extended her hand with a kind smile. "Hi, I'm Laura." Claire shook her hand, the motion stiff. "Nice to meet you," she said softly, though her eyes were fixed on me. There was a pause, a silence filled with everything that didn't need to be said. Finally, she asked, "You're doing well." I met her gaze, evenly. "Better than ever," I said, not with arrogance, just truth. She nodded slowly, swallowing whatever words she wanted to say. Then quietly she said, "I guess you finally became the man I told you to be." For a moment, I just looked at her, remembering all those years of being diminished, all those moments when her words cut deep. And then I said, "No, Claire, I became the man I was meant to be. You just didn't have the patience to meet him." Her face fell slightly, and I could see it. The flicker of regret, the understanding that this was a moment she couldn't undo. Laura gently touched my arm, grounding me, reminding me that I didn't need to say more. I nodded to Claire, polite and calm, and turned back to Laura. We walked away together, leaving the past behind, not with anger, but with finality. That night, as we drove home, Laura looked at me and smiled. "You handled that well," she said. I smiled back, keeping my eyes on the road. "I didn't have to handle it," I said. "It was already over a long time ago." She reached for my hand, and for the first time in years, I felt something pure, contentment, the kind that doesn't come from victory, but from peace. In the days that followed, I thought a lot about that moment, about how life has a way of circling back, not to test you, but to show you how far you've come. Claire's words used to define me. They used to shape how I saw myself, how I moved, how I breathed, but now they were just echoes of a story that didn't belong to me anymore. I had learned that real strength isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about becoming so whole that you don't need to. So if you're listening to this, wondering when it gets easier, when it stops hurting, remember this. It doesn't happen all at once. You wake up one day and the weight is just gone. You stop replaying the arguments, stop craving their approval, stop needing them to see your worth. You realize that walking away wasn't weakness. It was courage, the kind that doesn't shout but whispers, "You deserve better." So be a man, not by fighting, not by yelling, not by trying to prove what you already know. Be a man by walking away, by standing tall, by building a life that doesn't depend on anyone else to give it meaning. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't to stay and fight, it's to let go and never look back. And if this story meant something to you, make sure to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Because sometimes all it takes to change your life is the courage to take that first step out the door and never turn around again.